Mr. Layng, Martine Jr., thanks so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter podcast. You can think of a lot of different places where a hit country songwriter would be likely to hail from. Stamford, Connecticut, of course, would not be the first place that you'd think of. So
Yeah,
talk to me a bit about growing up there. What did music look like in your household growing up?
well, in our household, it really wasn't rampant. We had five kids and lots of noise and stuff. But I was obsessed with music from really young age. When I mean Nat King Cole, Tony Bennett, when they'd come on the radio, I would always ask my dad to turn it up. So that would have been the late 40s and early 50s and stuff. Um, then the day, literally, rock and roll kind of started one day, Joe.
Mm.
It switched formats in New York, WINS and WMGM switched to rock and roll about the first week or so of 1956. And all of a sudden it was stuff like From Joe to Mary, I'm Sorry About Thursday Night, and then da 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 da, you know what I mean? I go, God almighty, what is this? This is the greatest thing I've ever heard. So, life changing. But I was the only kid in my group of people that I knew who was just obsessed with songs. I was obsessed with it from day one, and they were all obsessed with other things. And so I kind of wondered how the hell I would find my place. It may have been similar to you in Maryland. I don't know, but the idea of just being obsessed with Jerry Lee Lewis and Elvis Presley was not on the general radar in Greenwich and Stamford, Connecticut, where I was growing up.
Well, I have a connection with you there to a certain degree. Even though I was born 40 years later, I was still discovering music via the radio. That's not happening anymore. But there's a very specific thing about that medium and discovering music that way, in that you're not the one selecting what you're going to hear next. The DJ is, or the station itself is. And I just wonder, it's very interesting. How do you think that affected, where you ended up going as an artist or songwriter, in that all of this music was curated for you?
Well, somebody did a hell of a good job
Yeah.
because those people like Jerry Lee Lewis, Elvis, Ray Charles, Chuck Berry, I mean, they were just mind boggling. And whoever, discovered some of these, when Sam Phillips died, they played about seven of the artists that he had discovered in a row. And, it was, Roy Orbison, Elvis Presley, Charlie Rich, and on and on. Not one voice sounded the same. So finding people who had original sounds was kind of mind boggling in a world that didn't have internet and didn't have any, more, ready-made discovery ways for you. And so I just, man, I got no complaints. I was just thrilled. But the thing about the radio that I thought was so different from now is, when I would be a teenager riding along and I would hear a record, I had no idea what color the people were, what they looked like, sometimes whether they were a boy or a girl. I mean, I don't know if you remember the song "Why Do Fools Fall in Love," Frankie Lyman. You know,
Yeah,
that
I
could
do
have
know
been
that
a
song.
girl. I
Yeah.
mean, you didn't care. You didn't care what they looked like, where they were from. You didn't need to know anything about their background. You just either loved it or, and when you loved it, you said, God almighty, and then you find out, okay, this person is whatever, Fats Domino. He's a blimp, he's not handsome and everything, but he's mind-bogglingly good, and you just don't care. You only care about the song and the record. So that's a massive difference. Because now, I mean, I know that I could, you see a video and I fall in love with some girl and I just think, God, she's fabulous. And then I almost don't, I care what she sings, but I still love her whether I'm crazy about the song or not. It's a different,
That's
magnet.
interesting. I've never thought about that before, but you're kind of talking about the advantage of music and art without context whatsoever. So you're
Yeah.
just really experiencing the art itself in kind of I don't know if pure form would be the word for it, but you're certainly experiencing it without any mediating influences.
Yes, that's true. And,
Uh,
God, you hear it. I'm listening to the Chuck Berry biography right now. And I mean, that guy was so unbelievably literate, whether that's exactly the right word or not. I mean, his words are mind-boggling. He made up words like coolerator, for refrigerator. I mean, just a total original without, I think just even among our friends, it's your friends or my friends. How many people do you know that are pretty much uninfluenced by outside forces that are an entity unto themselves, that are just kind of inventing themselves? I mean, it's pretty rare. And when
None.
you meet someone like that, I don't care if they're 94 or 14, I'm going to call that person and say, hey, you want to have coffee? Because these are the originals that are going to say something that you never thought of, and, so anyway, when I hear a guy, and then there was this kid, Otis Blackwell, do you know him? The songwriter. He wrote songs like Breathless and Don't Be Cruel and All Shook Up and stuff like that. I mean, the guy was mind-boggling, and I didn't even know it, Joe, but he lived in Nashville in the last few years of his life. Man, I would have beaten a path to his door, but I just never knew it. And then when he died and I read his obit, and he had, lived, probably 3 miles from where we live, it's just, anyway,
That's a trip. So you mentioned right before we got on air that you and I have something in common, and that we both beat feet from university as soon as we could, and both of us pretty close to graduation. And you mentioned that you were one of the reasons that you beat feet from university is you were just so lit up by songwriting, and you wanted to get on with the whole venture. How did it even occur to you at that time that songwriting could be something that you were going to get into as a living? Because plenty of people enjoy music, they love it, they're inspired by it, they're lit on fire by it, but it never occurs to them that this is something that they could do for a living. When did it first occur to you that this is something that you could do for a living, and how did you go about it?
Well, I was so lost, I think I was about 20 or so. I was painting a house one summer, and I had a little radio next to me in the gutter of the house. And this song Abilene, I don't know if you know that song. Abilene, Abilene, prettiest town I've ever seen, blah, blah, blah. I said, God damn, that is so fantastic. I wonder if I could write a song. And at the time, I had read every song hits book and everything that came out, because every month there would be these 2 or 3 magazines that would print the hit song lyrics. And Joe, I knew that these songs only, they were about this wide, like a lot. How many lines? 3 inches long, and it takes 3 minutes. How's that possible? So I would read them, and a song like, "Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow" or something like that. So meaningful, so tender. What, 2.5 inches long to write the entire song? So I would read them, and I'd say, okay, how are they doing that? But this before I was even thinking about writing songs, but I knew that form. And so this one particular day when I was so desperate, and all my friends were, interning at American Can and these great companies, but I knew those companies would hate my guts. They wouldn't even hire me. They'd fire me in 2 hours if they did hire me. And I knew that, and I would hate it, and they'd hate me. And so what am I going to do? So when I decided I would try to write a song, I just said, I can do that. I'm obsessed with this. I can learn to do that. And so I just started walking around my neighborhood at night, singing songs and making up words and stuff. And fortunately, we lived in Connecticut, which is so close to New York. And when I in these music magazines, I saw where these musicians and songwriters hung out. And it was this bar called the Turf Bar. It was on Broadway, and it terrified me. But I was going to college in Manhattan, and I just went down there one day to find out where I could make a demo of my song that I thought was surely the next #1 record in the universe. Well, I didn't have the guts to go in there for two different days. And finally, on the third day, I said, nothing is going to change if you don't get your ass in that place and find out what. So I went in there. There was a couple of black guys that looked extremely cool to me. They had sunglasses on at like 3:00 in the afternoon, in dark room. And I asked them if they knew where I could make a demo. And they say, well, what instrument do you play? And I told them I didn't play an instrument. And they said, well, does your song have music? And I said, well, yeah. And he said, well, how does that have music if you don't play an instrument? And I said, well, I just sing it. And the guy says, in the air? And I said, yeah. And they just thought that was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. And they told me where to go make a demo. And for like $80, I made this demo. And I went home and turned over my Elvis Presley records and saw that his publisher, I saw the business stuff, which I knew nothing about. I looked up the name of the publisher under songwriter or on the label. It was in New York, and it was in the Brill Building in New York. And I just took my little demo and I went in, knocked on the doors, and
now the Brill Building in New York. This would have been, and forgive me if I'm getting my history wrong here, but would the Brill Building in New York, would this have been part of what was once called like Tin Pan Alley, like that kind of songwriting?
Well, probably. At the time, it was the building. I didn't know this, but it was where Carole King was, and Neil Sedaka, and these guys that were writing all the major hits of the day, and it was a very elegant building with like a brass lobby with, brass on the elevators and an elevator man. And I mean, it's really, and, anyway, but yes, this was the most famous music building. There were two famous ones. That was one, 1619 Broadway, the Brill Building, and 1650 Broadway. Both of them housed most of the music that was going on in New York at that time. So anyway, the guy that I got to play the song for was a man named Irwin Schuster, who became the most famous pop music publisher in America before he died. And I just loved him. I mean, he had on blue jeans, he had on a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and I said, God almighty, this is the coolest businessman I ever met in my friggin' life, He did not love my song, but I loved him. And, I had a couple of ideas of what else to do with it, and he told me where to go. And I just started knocking on doors, and I just got totally obsessed with it. And when I left Columbia, I just thought, well, this is all I'm ever going to do. So I don't need whatever else I need from Columbia, as much as I respected it.
So you're able to go and physically knock on doors, physically get into the offices of people like Irwin Schuster who are doing this on a world-class level, but they're not buying what you're selling at first, right? So
right.
What is your first foot in the door in a serious way where someone says, hey, what you wrote right there, that might be something, and, come a little bit further into the office, kid. What was your first composition that garnered you some sort of access or notoriety within the business, and what did it feel like when you received that?
Well, it was while I was still going to college. And Irwin Schuster said, the guys you're looking for were named, he told me, I didn't know I was looking for these guys. He said, they're called Feldman, Goldstein, and Gotterer. And they had just written My Boyfriend's Back and produced it for the Angels. And I kind of thought this song that I had played for Irwin might suit them. And he said, well, they're right across the street. Go over there. So I went over there. And they were the first people who let me in and paid attention to me. They took a bunch of my songs. The Angels were tied up in litigation, but I brought them a song one day called Looking for Boys. And they said, oh, God, we love that, but it needs a little something else. And so they sat down. They were a trio. They all wrote together. Jerry Goldstein sat down at the piano and started playing, and quickly we had this song called that was finished, Looking for Boys. So since the Angels were tied up in this litigation, they said, let's go find another three girls at some Brooklyn high school and we'll record them, which they did. And they were called the Pinups. And that record was not a smash, but it got to, I don't know, like 108 when they used to have what was called Bubbling Under in Billboard. And so I thought, well, this is definitely the greatest thing in the whole United States for me. So they recorded me as an artist and under a group called the Mavericks. And there was subsequently another group in Nashville called the Mavericks, but in 1964, whenever I was the Mavericks for about 2 hours. And, they would record my songs with other people and nothing major, Joe, but it was enough to just say, this is there's nothing like this. And, you hear your voice for the first time in the recording studio and you think, God, can that possibly be me? And, but, for a young person, especially a boy, because we were always thought of the ones at that time that were going to earn people's living, keep our family going, support our family. It's like the idea, this is how I'm going to do it, So anyway, just a huge eye opener.
What was it like, just on a nuts and bolts level and practically, what was it like to take these songs that you were, quote unquote, singing into the air at that time, without accompaniment, without musicians? What was the process like of taking those, I'm presuming, melodies that you had and lyrics and marrying them to music with like session musicians that you were working with? Were you working with session musicians? I don't even know.
No, what happened the day after, I went to this turf bar and the guys told me where to go to make a demo. I went over there and the guy who ran the studio hired the musicians, 4 musicians. And I went into the studio at the day that he told me, and I sang the song to them. And they just said, they would hit chords and they say, is this kind of what you're thinking? And I said, yeah, and so we made the demo and quickly, and whatever chords, all my songs are very simple. So when they hit the chords, they weren't any, earth shaking, C9s and stuff like that.
Right.
So, I came out of there with the demo quickly, because, I just sang it and they put the chords to it and I knew the rhythms and all that stuff. And, now, I did that for about, probably for about a year or a year and a half, actually. I was married. My wife gave me my first guitar in Christmas of 1965. We were married. And she gave me my first guitar. It was like literally a $15 guitar. And I wrote one of the songs on that album, this Music Man album that just came out. It was coming out with that guitar. That was the very first guitar song. It's a song called Love Comes and Goes. And so learning the guitar and, having your fingers hurt and how to make your, and how to put a song together was, on my guitar, it was just, it was a tool. I'm not a great guitar player. There's no one living that would want to hear me play the guitar, but I learned to play it. I could do the rhythms and I could do the melodies and I could explain to a studio musician, the mood that I was, hoping for and so on. And, that just, and sometimes I would put down a track and sing over it with me and my guitar. I got a few records that way with just me and my guitar. I usually would add a bass or something.
Now, as you're in there very early on, you're writing for the pinups, you're writing for your own project as an artist. You said you had a cup of coffee with the name The Mavericks, for a while. What are you learning from this group, Feldman, Goldstein, and Goddard? What are you learning from these writers who had been in the game a little bit longer, who were probably more polished and more professional as writers? What are some of the skills as a songwriter that you're learning at that time that you had to learn to bring songs eventually into the top 100 and have hits?
Well, I'd say the biggest thing I felt from them, which in the emotional part of what we do is so important, was this huge excitement that I felt. And they had already had this massive record. My Boyfriend's Back is still a massive record. Massive. In fact, it's the only song not written by the Four Seasons that's in Jersey Boys, the play that's basically gone around the world. It's the only song. That is pretty amazing. Yes. Well, these guys were just filled with enthusiasm and positive, and they were always, God, yeah, which is just how I felt about life in general. And I would go in there with the new song. God, that's fabulous. We got to record that now. Let's make a demo tomorrow. So I did know the form and I did know everything. And what I basically saw from them is like the yes, Jill, yes, let's do it. Yes. There was almost no, about anything. And so I would say of all the things that I got from them, it was this positive thing. Let's do it now. Let's call a studio now. And, that's kind of the way I feel about it. It helped me a lot. Like when I got to Nashville, and was with my publisher, who was named Ray Stevens, this fabulously brilliant man. He said, Layng, I don't pitch songs or anything. And I said, well, I don't care. I just want to be a better songwriter. And if you'll help me improve as a songwriter, I'll take my songs out because I'll like that, which I did. I loved it. And so this basic enthusiasm that I felt from Feldman Goldstein, I mean, we're still friends. I haven't seen all of them in a long time, but I'm off and on in touch with them. And Richie Goddard, who produced the Go-Go's, like maybe 30 years ago or whatever, came to Nashville a couple of years ago, and we had drinks together. So, I mean, we're still, and I tell them that, that they were the kickoff to my entire life. And so it's funny, they certainly taught me a lot about songwriting, because when the day we sat down, like with Looking for Boys, and they were pounding on the piano, I kind of saw what they did, which was, get to the chorus in a hurry, have it make sense all the way, have a background part that the Looking for Boys background part was just so cool. They had a great background part in My Boyfriend's Back. Hey la, my boyfriend's back. They're tuned into all the elements. And I did find that if you could go into the studio with all these elements, including like on this album that, that we're talking about, Music Man, there's a song called Let the World Go By. That was one of my really, really early songs that I wrote before I had a guitar. But I had the intro and the thing that would be in between the verses and stuff, the musical, da, 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 and I saw how you have all these elements so that people don't have to say, well, what about this? And I want to hear what about this, but not a new intro unless it's just mind-boggling, because I've been thinking about it enough, and but learning how to have all the parts, have the intro, how does the verse lay out, how much time is there between the first chorus, then the beginning of the second verse, is there any time, does it go right into it, all these little simple things that once you're in the studio you better know them, because otherwise it ain't going to go on the tape.
Yes, or just like in life in general, if you haven't made a decision, life will make a decision for you.
Absolutely.
So, now, I want to go back to something that you said there that I found very interesting. You mentioned that they were very keyed into these background parts. They were very keyed into getting to the chorus immediately. And those are a few things that I've heard doing this show for a long time from songwriters that are important. One thing that you mentioned that I've never heard before, that I'd like you to expound upon a little bit, is the idea that the song needs to make sense all the way through. What were you saying? What do you mean when you say that, and how do you accomplish that when you're working on a song?
Well, first of all, just an aside, that was the way I learned songwriting. But if you take a song like 99 Tears, you know that song? Well, it's you'd know it if you heard it. Mm-hmm. I have no idea what that song is about. So that song, doesn't literally make sense. It may make sense. I don't really know, but I couldn't tell you one word of that song except for 99 Tears and this organ part that is mind-boggling. So there are lots of ways to have hits, including instrumentals that have no words. But Ray Stevens, who was my publisher for 10 years in Nashville, when he said, Layng, you lost me in that third line, so I have absolutely no idea what your song is about. I was, God damn, that's horrible, because this is one of the smartest guys who ever lived. If he can't understand it, nobody's going to understand it. Just related to that, I remember one of the first songs I wrote when I moved to Nashville had the word escalator in it. So this was 1972, so 51 years ago. He said, Layng, take out escalator. Take my word for it. You know what it means because you went to Macy's in New York and bought a shirt. But nobody else in the country is going to know what that escalator is. I said, okay, it's gone. So I got really tuned into what is from my background, what is from everybody's background. Simple words, simple stories. Let them know. A good example of what I've learned from all these people is about making sense. I have a song called "Rub It In." It's about being on the beach and blah blah blah. So the first line is, "Lay beside me in the sand, put some lotion on your hand." Boom, you got the picture. And that was an example of what I learned from all these people. Take them by the hand from the very first second, and then take them somewhere, preferably somewhere that's unexpected but believable. You know, you didn't see it coming, but when you got there, oh God damn, that's fantastic, man! I love this friggin' thing, you know. And so this was really what I think of for me was the Ray Stevens School of Songwriting, which was, you know,
Yes.
Got to make sense, and it's just not good enough to have a bunch of rhythm. It's not just good enough to have a great chorus. You got to have a complete story, and then when the second verse starts, take them to a new place, and then if you have a bridge, take them to a new place, and then surprise them, but don't surprise them to the extent that says, "What? I thought we were in England," you know?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I love that phrase, unexpected but believable, because you're dealing with a tension right there with your listener where yes, you do want to surprise them, but you don't want to, it's almost like you don't want to upset them. And upset them would be by, well, now the song is taking place on a colony on Mars. It's like, no, it's not. That's not what you said.
Yeah. You didn't tell me that. Goddamn, how'd we get to Mars? You know?
Yes. Yeah. But you take a song like one of my favorite songs, and obviously I don't think he wrote it, but the song that George Jones interpreted, The Grand Tour, where he's giving you a grand tour of his house, but then it turns out he's giving you a grand tour of all the rooms in the house that his wife has abandoned.
Yeah.
And it's like that. It is unexpected because when he goes, come on up, walk right in. Would you like to take the grand tour? You're not expecting this very sad song, but then you get it, but then it's very believable as
Absolutely.
well.
Yes, that is a total classic and a perfect example. And it's pictures, Joe. When he's taking you around, boom, you see it. Boom, you see it.
As you leave, you'll see the nursery. She left me without I mean, you can see the nursery there. I find when I get stuck writing, I have a little card on my wall that just says imagery. So if I'm stuck, I'll be stuck and I'll kind of hit the page and then I'll look up and I'll always see that little card that says imagery. And I find if I go back to imagery, then even if I don't end up using the image, it gets me unstuck from where I'm at.
That's very good. If you can picture it and help someone else picture it, that's really what you're trying to do. You're trying to bring them into the same mental space as you.
Take me to this Nashville that you find in the 70s. You're there on the ground. Ray Stevens is your publisher. Eventually, in 1976, you would get what I have to imagine would be the cut that you were trying to get when you arrived there, which is, Elvis Presley ends up cutting way down. But can you kind of explain arriving in town and how you get to this point where the king is cutting one of your songs?
Well, you and I would have a similar trajectory, although the steps are different, because there's a desperation that has to come into your body to do what you and I do. Like the day that you drove, 2 days yet, you drove to Chicago and you said, I'm free, I can finally be myself. When we got to Nashville, I had just failed in a fish and chips restaurant that I did. You could buy one of these franchises for like 3 cents. And that just looked like really peanuts. It looked like, okay, I'm going to have this fish and chips place and all these wonderful people that I hire are going to run it. And I'm going to write songs and visit every Friday and collect money and go back and write songs. Well, I mean, I lost my ass. I lost our house. We had 2 little kids. I was friggin' desperate, to situation. And at that point, before the fish and chips, I'd spent 4 years writing ads on Madison Avenue, which just was not for me. It's a perfectly legitimate job, but it was really not for me. I wanted to start with a blank piece of paper every day and not find out that by 4 o'clock I'd had 3 commercials for a women's laxative or something. That's not how I wanted to,
Right.
So when we got to Nashville and I could spend every waking hour writing songs, Joe. It was like I had gone to heaven. I cranked out songs, and when we got to Nashville, Ray said, Layng, I'm not responsible for you. You're responsible for yourself. If nothing happens, because he wasn't paying me or anything. I said, no, I know that. I said, all I need is someone to help me improve. And, if you'll pay for the demos, then I'll take them around. So this perfect storm, because I was just made to take my songs around, because I didn't really want anyone else to take them around, because they might do it tomorrow and I want to do it in 10 minutes, So I would write these songs, make the demos, look at the list of the people who were recording, and knock on the doors and see if they see me. And if they wouldn't, Ray said, if you can't get in a door and I know the person, I'll help you. And he knew most of the people, but not all. And most of the people would listen, because I learned you stay as long as they're listening to songs. And when they're not listening anymore, you leave. You don't ask them about vacation or tell them about your big Newton collection or anything. You just get out of there. So they knew, okay, if I let this kid in, he's gone. He's not here for this. So I just started doing this, and I started meeting people, and I started learning the kinds of songs they wanted and who wanted what, and blah, blah, blah. And I got a few. The first record recording was by a woman named Jessie Coulter, who became a gigantic star. My record was not the key to her success, but the record was produced by Chet Atkins and Ray Stevens together. And
wow.
Yeah, I'd been in Nashville like a month or something. And so I just kept reaffirming this. I couldn't pay for this. If I were a quillionaire, I couldn't make people like my songs or record my songs. You can't buy it. So, I know you know this thing. So I just began taking my songs around every day. I would write and pitch and write and pitch and write and pitch. That's all I did. That and my family. So I had this song this Rub It In song that I'd written in Connecticut. Ray recorded me singing it. He made a great record of it. But it came out in August, and it was a summer song, a beach song, and it became a huge hit in some giant cities like Houston and stuff. So I knew it was in the grooves. I started using it as a demo. I took it to this guy named Billy Crash Craddock, who was having big hits at the time. This was like 73 or 4. And he recorded Rub It In. It became this massive #1 country record and a top 20 pop record. It later became a commercial, Plug It In, which lasted forever in the commercial. And it just made me feel like, okay, I am a songwriter. I can do this. I am supporting my family. And there were so many aspects to the failure of the restaurants that helped, Joe, because I said, God, I just put my life and my life savings or whatever into this restaurant. It was a total failure. And I didn't really give a shit about this restaurant at all. I just was using it as a tool to, if I ever get another nickel, I'm only going to put it in things relating to our family. I'm going to buy a house. If I buy another house, but I'm not ever doing anything that I don't care about or really know anything about. So all of these things made a big difference, because when Rub It In became a success, the first thing we did was save so we could, buy a house, a decent house. And that enabled us to have staying power, because we hadn't bought a big truck or a big TV or, blah, blah. So this song pitching thing was something that I loved, being in the room when someone listened to my songs. Even if they turn it off, sometimes after 30 seconds, they'd say, wrong tempo. But, things would happen, like you'd play them a song and they'd say, Layng, I love that song, but, she just had a miscarriage and she's not going to be singing about kids for a long time. You pick up information that you never would have gotten if somebody were representing you. So there were so many aspects like that about taking these songs around that I never found it depressing when they turned it off. It was more of a lesson because, you know, I came home and told my wife one day and I said, look, they turned my songs off, but it's not their job to love my songs. It's my job to bring them a song they like and try to figure out what the hell does this guy like. You know, I also learned, Joe, don't bother taking songs to people whose records you don't like. Why the hell would they like your songs if they, you know, take your songs to people whose records you love. And so that was kind of what I did. But I had sent 20 or 25 songs to Elvis because everybody had the address supposedly that would get it listened to. But I never heard word one. There was one publisher in Nashville. He was the most famous publisher in Nashville named Bob Beckham. And he was known to have a direct line to Elvis's producer, who's a guy named Felton Jarvis. And no one else tried to tap into that because it was a relationship that he'd cultivated. So nobody, you know, was going to, you know, beg him to use his pull. But I was out pitching my songs one day and waiting in the lobby of a producer's office. And Bob Beckham came and sat down next to me. And he said, hey, Layng, you bust your ass. You work your ass off. You got anything for Elvis? And I said, yeah, I do. Bring it to me. I brought it to him. It literally the last new song Elvis ever records in his friggin' life. So this guy that I'd idolized since I was 7th or 8th grade or whatever it was, this guy, Felton Jarvis called me up when he was mixing the record. He says, Layng, you want to come over and listen to me mix the record? I go over there. I'd never met him. The guy who was engineer became the producer of The Judds later on. So these guys were like multi-max talented people. The room is dark, Joe. You can't see anything. You just hear this. I hear this pounding of this guy singing my song, most famous song singer that ever lived, you know. So the room is dark. I'm leaning back and I think, how in the world is it like 20 years after I first heard this guy and went crazy, changed my whole life, he's singing my goddamn song? You know, and so there were these payoffs that have nothing to do with the money, that are unbuyable. And so this was, you know, what I lived for. And so it helped certainly that, you know, earn our living and keep our family alive. But the idea that this impossible thing had happened was, yes, you know.
Well, but it happened in a way that I find very interesting, because when you described, you know, going from session to session and trying to play these songs for folks, the image I have in my mind is if you're in a bar in Chicago at 1 o'clock in the morning near closing time, there's going to be a guy walking behind you with a cooler slung over his shoulder saying, tamales, 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 tamales. And if you've had enough to drink and you can like maybe drive home and sober up, or you have to sober up for whatever reason, you pull out $10 and you give him $10 for, you know, 4 tamales, and you choose a red or a green sauce. I really don't see any difference between what that guy was doing with his wares and what you were doing studio to studio. So it's a very kind of very personal touch with what you were selling, and it was a lot of shoe leather to get there, because it sounds like you don't get that, you know, song with Jarvis unless he knows. He says, "Hey man, you've been working hard. What do you got for Elvis?" You don't get that unless you spend 6 years of shoe leather going around from studio to studio.
Well, I honestly don't think so, because, you know, he wasn't prone to offering a lot of people. I never heard of another. I mean, and I don't know. It was just, I mean, I love this guy, Bob Beckham. I would see him around. I had known him for, you know, years. I mean, we weren't bosom buddies, but he would sometimes say, "Hey, we're having a birthday party at the company today. Why don't you come over?" And, you know, things like that. But that's not a business thing. It was just, Nashville is a very giving community. I am not involved in it now. I don't write songs anymore, so I'm not taking my songs around. But people helped you. We all helped each other. If someone had an appointment with someone and they heard an incredible song of Joe Pug's and they said, you know, Joe, that song's better than what I was going to take him. Let me have it. I'll take it for him. So we all did each other so many favors, and we passed information. It was a true synergistic situation where every, you know, two and two made 350,000. And there was an immense amount of affection between people, great admiration. I think I still know pretty much every single person who was of my, you know, time and wave of people who came to Nashville at roughly the same time. Most of us are still alive, and we're still unbelievably close and respectful. And one of them, a friend of mine's birthday today, and I just said thank you for being a perfect friend to me for, you know, 51 years, you know. So there's an immense amount of affection that I think has contributed to Nashville's success as a place. People are welcome. No one is shitting on you because you're going to come and try and take the records that they want to get. It's just the opposite, really. I always got the feeling, Joe, there's enough for everybody. I don't have to win and you don't have to lose.
From the people who I talk to who are working there now on a very high level, it seems to me to still be, that culture still seems to be the case from what I can see. Talk to me a bit about this new record, Music Man. Talk to me also about your son, Tucker Martine, who is a music producer of note in his own right and all that. Talk to me about the foundations of this album. What was it like to make it, and what were you trying to get across?
Well, this album is something that Tucker basically gave me about 6 or 7 years ago at Christmas time. He said, Dad, for Christmas, I am giving you 5 days in my studio. I'm giving you me as a producer and me as a drummer, and you pay the musicians, and I'm going to pick the songs. And I said, and I'll shut up in the studio. I'll do anything. I'm your puppet. You just tell me what to do, you know, and I'll do it. And that's what we did. And it was such a huge charge, Joe, because, I mean, Tucker had produced, you know, My Morning Jacket and the Decemberists and Bill Frisell and these great people and everything. So it was such a treat to just go in there and just know that I didn't have to do any thinking. I mean, Tucker has just a Xerox machine for a memory. And he knows every friggin' song that I ever wrote, which is over 600. So he went back. A bunch of songs on this album are from the 60s, and then they're from all different years. I think the newest one was from 2012, but that's an anomaly. Most of them were much earlier. And he thought of the album. He didn't. We just did it as a family thing. This was not an album that we were doing it would ever be out. And so he knew what the order of the songs would be and how the songs would make into a 12-song album. And I mean, we just had, one of the things that was important that helped me doing this was I had just read the Keith Richards book called Life. And one of the maybe the key thing I read in the whole book was that when Mick Jagger did his vocals, the first time he did the thing all the way through without making a mistake, that was the take. He didn't go back and say, let me see if I really nailed it. He just said, you know, it was the true emotion, no punch-ins and everything. So that was pretty much what we did. There might have been one or two punch-ins, but pretty much none. We just, you know, did the vocals. That was a subtle thing, but I did anything he said. If he said, Dad, that needs an there or something, we'd go back punching in. But it was such fun watching the way he handles everybody and the way he's able to say, you know, almost, you know, for the 900th time, you know, to anybody, just letting him be in charge was the best feeling. I would go in there every day, Joe, and I never had to say, oh man, I'm a friggin' nervous wreck. I hope I can come up with some good ideas today. He already had all the ideas. He had it nailed all to the wall. And so we did it in 5 days, and then he mixed it, and I stayed out of it. And Slim Moon from Kill Rock Stars Records heard the record a year or two ago or something, and he said, Tucker, I love this record. I'm going to put this out, you know. And Tucker said, I'm sure he said something like, well, you know, my dad's like 300 years old. And he said, well, I love the record, you know. And so, I mean, I'm 81. The idea that they wanted, you know, anything to do with this just gives me a huge charge. And,
Yeah.
you know.
Well,
So,
you want to talk about, you know, you mentioned it was an experience listening to the mix, your track with Elvis, and it was an experience that you couldn't buy. You want to talk about an experience that money can't buy. It's your son producing your record like that. I mean, that is just, God bless, man. That's a beautiful, beautiful thing.
well, thank you. Well, he's a beautiful, beautiful person, and he's got so much guts, Joe. He left home. He told us when he was about 14, Dad, I'm not going to college. I just want you to know. He left either the day after his graduation from high school or 2 days afterwards. He was, I think, 19, and he called up one night and he says, Mom, Dad, I have been to every state in the United States, and I'm going to live in Seattle, Washington. And I mean, that's the kind of guts. He would call some nights and he'd say, you wouldn't believe it, but I just spent the night by a lake in Wyoming. There wasn't one other person, one other sound, just me and the moon and the lake. And, you know, I mean, he's heart and soul times 300,000, you know? So,
Oh, man.
He's been a treat since he was a little tiny person.
That's a beautiful thing. And I was going to say, you know, it is beautiful that he made the record like that for you. But when you consider it that you had to rear him, it's also the most expensive record you've ever had to make.
But you know what, Joe? Here's the crazy part of that. And I've told Tucker this 1,000 times. He raised himself. He knew. He really did. He had an incredible sense of what he was all about, what he should do. So young. And so, Lyndon, are you still there? Yeah, I saw a click. My wife and
I'm here. I can hear you.
My wife and I just said, you know, let him roll. He knows. I mean, he would have people coming to his room when he was like 15, people who were like 35 years old, but they'd have some floppy disk or something to try on his, and they'd be in there, you know, 3 hours doing stuff. He just had a sense of, you know, where he was going, what he was doing. It's just incredibly exciting to see it play out. I mean, because when you're a parent, you have no idea. You hope it plays out, but you don't know. And then we just watched him build his life and, you know, relationships and skills and the skills that he had. I mean, his studio, when I walk in, I thought, what, you know what these 3 things are? Oh, you know what these other 84 things do too? You hooked them all up? You know, it's mind-boggling.
Oh, man, that's a beautiful thing. Well, it's a beautiful thing, and it's a beautiful record, and it's humbling that you took the time for our show today. So thank you very much, Mr. Layng Martine Jr.
Joe, you are a total ace. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Okay.
Bye.
I'm gonna